Welcome, family. Let's dive into an interesting topic. Who are the New World Africans? The term refers to the descendants of Africans forcibly brought to the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade, genetic Africans who live in various countries in North America. It's considered a more accurate title opposed to African American or FBA, as it includes all of our genetic relatives here in North America, no matter which country they ended up. As we know, slaves from the same region were dispersed in many directions, and their descendants may have developed distinct traits within these new territories. Yet, this doesn't make relatives not related anymore because of these minute differences in their subcultures we created while being ostracized in colonial societies. The focus should be more on unity and finding a common ground among the diasporas. The discovery of the New World reshaped global history, marking the beginning of colonial exploitation, wicked colonization, and empirical conformity. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish crown, arrived in the Caribbean, opening the door to a new era of exploration. However, various indigenous civilizations had already thrived in the Americas for thousands of years. European nations, driven by colonial competition and moral-less logic, sought wealth, land, and trading routes, which led to eventual colonization, enslavement, and cultural upheaval. The arrival of Africans through the transatlantic slave trade further transformed the New World, and the birth of New World Africans would begin as a result of these events. These Africans were forced to build America with their forced labor and agricultural skills. If they were forced to build a country dominated by others who opposed them, how can the term foundational be accurate when describing our ancestors? The word foundational implies these people were building for the sake of themselves, which we know to be untrue. It was only out of the necessity of survival did these Africans participate in any foundational activity regarding America. It's a fact that the original Americans did not view African descending people to be citizens or equals in their society. Not one African or Black American had a hand in writing the Constitution, nor was any literature written to include them and provide them with the same liberties of their colonial counterparts until the 13th Amendment, which literally took a war and millions of lives lost to even reach that point. Using simple logic, one would conclude Africans of that time would not be happy or wanting to build anything for a nation they weren't even a citizen of prior to the Civil War. Next, we'll discuss the term Negro and its connection to New World Africans. The term Negro usually refers to people of African descent, mainly sub-Saharan tribal people. In America, it was also used to refer to natives in North America who may have had a similar complexion. I believe that these natives lived more similar to Africans than that of colonials, which also contributed to this description cluster, labeling us as one. It begins with ignorance of tribal sovereignty and lack of understanding the language, culture, and territorial warfare that tribal Africans and natives in America lived by. Negro means black in Spanish and Portuguese and is derived from the Latin word niger, of the same meaning. The wicked colonials used skin complexion to associate these purported races, which ultimately became their negligent erasure of our individuality and tribal customs. The transatlantic slave trade's occurrence separated so many families, stripping people from their homeland and sending them to a faraway land was a devastating blow to the African world. The Africans who made the horrific journey endured further turmoil. It was back-breaking labor that even the colonials couldn't do themselves. Still, these Africans endured these and many other atrocities. These events created a new bond with Africans throughout the New World. The intermixing between themselves, their colonial captors, and even with natives in the New World created an amalgamation within the territories they resided. This, however, does not make them no longer Africans, simply because they lost their culture and may have unique varying admixture, or even the fact they were born on another continent. It's extremely apparent through genetics and even elements of their subcultures that they descend from Africans. The selection of Africans as the primary source of enslaved labor in America was not coincidental. It was a calculated decision based on economic, agricultural, and social factors. Unlike Native American populations, who were decimated by disease and familiar with the land, making escape more feasible, Africans were seen as an ideal labor force due to their agricultural expertise, resilience to tropical diseases, and they thought Africans would not be able to easily escape in a foreign land. Many Africans were taken from regions which had tribes that specialized in rice, cotton, and indigo farming, which aligned with the plantation economy of the American South. European traders and American colonists exploited these skills, using enslaved Africans to build the economic foundation of the colonies, and later the United States. They exploited the existing slave trade, where tribes enslaved one another for various reasons. In those times, tribes didn't view each other as one people or a race. It was tribal warfare to them, and displacing their enemy was useful to their agenda of gaining power in these regions. Beyond forced labor, enslaved Africans were deliberately stripped of their identity to ensure control and assimilation into American society. Language, culture, religion, and even family structures were systematically dismantled to create a docile workforce with no ties to their homeland. Laws prohibited African tradition, native languages, and spiritual practices, forcing enslaved people to adopt European customs, Christianity, and English names. This cultural erasure ensured that future generations would identify with America rather than Africa, solidifying their role as a permanent underclass. Even after emancipation, systemic policies like segregation, redlining, and mass incarceration continued to suppress Black self-sufficiency and wealth building. Despite this, Black Americans today are a massive economic force, yet much of their spending benefits others rather than their own communities. According to data from the National Retail Federation, Black consumers spend billions on major holidays like Christmas, $65 billion, Thanksgiving, $4 billion, and Valentine's Day, $1.6 billion. If just a fraction of this spending were redirected toward Black-owned banks, businesses, and investments, it could help establish generational wealth and economic independence. Instead, these dollars overwhelmingly flow into industries and corporations that have historically excluded or exploited Black people. Reinvesting in Black businesses, purchasing land, and creating community institutions are strategies that could shift economic power. The same way enslaved Africans built America's wealth, New World Africans today have the financial power to build a new prosperous future. However, this requires a collective shift in mindset, prioritizing self-sufficiency over consumerism and focusing on economic empowerment over assimilation into a system designed to maintain inequality. Many Black American families have passed down stories of Native American ancestry, often believing they have indigenous roots due to oral history, family law, or physical traits. However, while some Black Americans do have Native ancestry, many of these stories may be the result of historical misconceptions, cultural blending, or even a means of navigating racial identity under oppressive laws. Africans and Native Americans often lived in close proximity, especially in the South, where intermarriage and alliances occurred. However, in many cases, what was interpreted as Indian blood could actually be the adoption of native customs rather than biological lineage. A prime example of this is the Black Seminoles, who were Africans that escaped slavery and found refuge among the Seminole Nation in Florida. These Africans adopted Seminole clothing, language, and customs while maintaining their own African traditions. They were not necessarily of native ancestry, but their way of life became deeply intertwined with Seminole culture. Similar interactions occurred in other regions where Africans lived alongside indigenous people, leading to the blending of traditions in food, language, and resistance strategies. Both groups shared common struggles: land dispossession, enslavement, and systematic oppression, which should make them natural allies in America today. However, falsely claiming another group's culture can be harmful, as it erases their unique history and contributes to division. Some Africans in the diaspora influenced by colonial narratives and racial confusion, have distanced themselves from their African roots by claiming indigenous identities that have little factual basis. This plays into the agenda of keeping Africans divided worldwide, weakening the push for unity and self-determination. Rather than falsely adopting another culture, Africans and Native Americans should recognize their shared histories of resistance and oppression, forming strategic alliances to demand justice, economic empowerment, and political strength in America. Recognizing the truths of our history rather than myths will create stronger foundations for collective progress. Why should Black Americans insert African into their identity? Black Americans have a unique and powerful history that is deeply connected to Africa, and it is crucial that we continue to embrace this heritage as a core part of our identity. While centuries of oppression in America have attempted to sever our connection to Africa, the truth is that our ancestry, culture, and even the very foundation of our resilience are tied to the continent. Our language, music, spiritual practices, and even the foods we eat carry the echoes of Africa. To reject this connection is to deny a fundamental part of who we are and to weaken the foundation for future generations. If we allow our African heritage to be lost or forgotten, the impact on our youth will be devastating. Without a sense of historical grounding, young Black Americans may struggle with identity, self-worth, and purpose. When we disconnect from Africa, we unknowingly adopt the false narrative that our history began in America rather than recognizing the vast African civilizations we came from. This disconnection leads to cultural confusion, making it easier for society to dictate who we are rather than us defining ourselves. Young people who lack a strong cultural foundation are more vulnerable to negative influences, including self-hatred, internalized racism, and the glorification of destructive behaviors. Keeping Africa at the center of our identity is an act of empowerment. It allows us to reclaim our history, celebrate our achievements, and build a future based on the strength of our ancestors. When Black youth understand that they come from a legacy of greatness, they move through the world with confidence and purpose. They will see themselves as more than just a marginalized group in America. They will see themselves as part of a global African family with a progressive future. By preserving and teaching our African heritage, we give the next generation the tools they need to stand tall, unite, and continue the fight for progress. Africa is not just our past, it is our future. Our story is still being written, and you are a part of it. Stay informed, stay empowered, and most importantly, stay connected to your roots. Until next time, keep building, keep rising, and never forget who you are. Peace and power.